This is the Book of Dad with Robert Benson, an upbeat weekly review of personal anecdotes, helpful tips, and communal chat about the ups and downs of parenting. Your host, Robert Benson, knows that being a dad is not easy, but this show is for all the dads just trying to do their best. Now, here's Robert.
Hey, welcome to the Book of Dad radio show. This is Dr. Robert Benson. As always, before we get started, we want to say thank you to Jehovah. Thank Him for His Son, Jesus Christ. Thank Him for our families. Thank Him for work and our ability to do the things we're able to do. Dr. Robert Benson, Life and Spirit Online, only on the NASCA Network, the Book of Dad radio show. Well, as usual, I'll try to bring you some relevant topics and content, that kind of thing there. But today I'm going to talk about something that we all have, or talk to a professional who can talk to us about something that we all really have to deal with at some point in our lives. It's kind of inevitable, if you will. One of the quotes I put in one of my books is that how their life is kind of like you're a rabbit versus the hare. Remember that fable where the rabbit is really always out front, running real fast and everything's going on. But if you look in the rearview mirror, you can always see the hare in the background because it's catching up with you. And on some levels, I kind of make it analogous to, death or life being, catching up to you at some point, But I'm not going to babble on. But what I'm going to talk today, what we're going to talk to you all today about is elderly people and taking care of elderly people, families. I mean, we all have elderly people in our family, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, etc., parents, you name it. But again, I'm not going to steal thunder and I'm not going to babble on. I'm going to talk to a geriatrician, a doctor by the name of Dr. Antonio Graham, and he's going to come in and he's going to shed some light on us about a bunch of different stuff on this topic. Dr. Graham, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Dr. Benson.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you and I have talked in passing a couple different times, and you know that this topic is very, very sensitive to a lot of people, and because like I say, it's something that everyone has to deal with at some point. But before we get into the specifics about geriatrics, as it were, talk a little bit about Dr. Graham, who you are, your practices, and how you became to be the guy that you are.
Sure. So I am a geriatrician at the Atlanta VA. I'm also an assistant professor of medicine and geriatrics at Emory University School of Medicine, and I did a fellowship in geriatrics at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and an internal medicine residency at the University of Alabama. And I have practiced at the VA that is primarily outpatient, veterans over 75 years of age at the VA. That's the definition of elderly, though in the nation, the definition is 65 and greater. So I do quite a bit of dementia care. As we know, lots of older adults do have dementia, and then kind of your routine, diabetes, hypertension management, caregiver burden, and trying to decrease that burden. Of course, at the VA, having so many resources at my disposal to help veterans and their families. So that's kind of a brief description of what my practice is like.
Certainly. Hey, well, let me just say, as a veteran and on behalf of other veterans who you serve, thank you so much for doing what you do. It is most certainly greatly appreciated. Now, you said something earlier that I found very interesting, and it was not a discrepancy, but a difference between the elderly age, if you will. I'm not sure I'm using the right term, but you said 75 versus 65. What was the differences in those two ages, and where are they different?
So the actual definition of elderly in the United States, like if World Health Organization, anyone else, it's 65. But in the VA, they specifically consider geriatrics as 75 and older. And that is really just a definition of, at this age, we want to consider those particular veterans that are 75 and up to be taken care of by geriatricians. So like, for instance, Bronze Clinic, which is the geriatric clinic at the VA, that's kind of the age that we typically take veterans at. Do we have some that are younger? Yes, because some of them have so many other medical conditions. They're almost physiologically, older than their chronological age. So we do take care of a few young folks, but in general, like my average age of my panel is 82 at the VA.
82. Wow, that's interesting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Continue, Doctor.
I was going to say, so the VA just defines it differently. That's all. But the actual definition for the United States is 65 and up.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a series of diseases or symptoms, I guess, that are typically us elderly people are associated with. You mentioned dementia, diabetes, etc. Why is it that elderly people are susceptible to those diseases?
Well, typically, as if someone can get through their 20s and 30s, and 40s without really any chronic disease, as you get older, just kind of these things sometimes begin to catch up, because there's this whole concept of what we call physiologic reserve, which age 30 is the peak of that. And really what that means is that your body kind of has the ability to fight off or handle any type of I guess you could say disease or other things. It's at its peak of being able to keep you kind of in homeostasis, as we call it, your body in regulation without disease. And age 30 is the peak of that. So from age 30 on, you become more susceptible kind of to chronic diseases, because your body's ability to kind of keep everything regulated decreases after 30. And of course, certainly as you get closer to 60, 70, if there are already some assaults, it becomes more difficult for you to kind of keep those diseases away.
Yeah, so basically it's an immune system breakdown or degradation, if you will.
Yeah, it's immune. It's kind of the whole auto-regulation process just is not as good in older adults as it is as younger. But of course, there are things you can do that help. So those, studies have shown those who have more of a plant-based diet tend not to suffer as much with, a lot of these chronic medical conditions. Those who exercise, 4 days a week, 30 minutes a day, they have less of these chronic conditions. And also there's a lot of studies pointing to in middle age, meaning like 40, 35 or so to about 50, the kind of care that you take care of yourself in that age is very indicative of how well you'll do as a senior.
I see. The thing that I find interesting is that more and more when people talk about working out, it used to be a time where they would say you could work out 2 times a week for about a half hour. Now you're talking about 4 times a week. So
yeah.
That number keeps going up.
Really back that up. Yeah, that if you could do majority days of the week, so, 4, 30 minutes a day, that, they follow people who do this. And that's basically panned out to be the greatest benefit, was about 4 days a week, 30 minutes rather, for 4 days a week.
I see. But
less dementia.
Dr. Graham, talk to me a little bit about dementia. I've heard it talked about several times and how it leads to things like Alzheimer's and stuff like that. What exactly is dementia? I've never got a real clear definition on that.
Sure. So honestly, dementia really is like a catch-all term.
Okay.
It is really not a specific term. So we use it to say that, this is some level of cognitive impairment, meaning that memory is affected as well as some function. And when I say function, meaning things like being able to do your bills, being able to use a cell phone, being able to remember tasks that you have to do. When those things are affected, that's more of your functional status. So in order to say someone actually has some form of dementia, you have to have both memory and functional deficits. So that's one thing. Okay. The other is that there is a difference in the subtypes. So there's 5 major subtypes of dementia in America. One is, of course, the biggest one, Alzheimer's, is the largest type of dementia that you find. Like about 50% of all the dementias are Alzheimer's dementias in America. And then about another 20% or so are vascular dementia, meaning someone who's had a stroke or had high blood pressure for many years, maybe 40, 50 years of high blood pressure. They'll have like these little small ischemic areas or small strokes that lead to some deficits in how they process and think. And what we're finding out at autopsy is that a lot of people actually have both Alzheimer's and vascular. So mixed is probably the greatest type of dementia. And then there's a dementia associated with Parkinson's disease, Lewy body dementia, which is a little bit more rare, about 10% associated with that. But those are kind of your 3 biggest categories of dementia. Wow, but dementia, again, is just a catch-all term for memory and functional impairment.
Okay, I understand. So basically the 3 big types of dementia are Alzheimer's, vascular, stroke, or Parkinson. I see. Okay, so Dr. Graham, thank you so much for that information. And what we're going to do is take a quick break. So when we come back, I want to ask you some questions about your recommendations on care. The possible, the coverage, if you will, insurance and those types of things as we go forward, okay? So this is Dr. Robert Benson, the Book of Dad radio show, talking to Dr. Antonio Graham, geriatrician, and we'll be right back.
Hey, this is Erica Janae, and you're listening to Life and Spirit Radio. the U.S. dollar will collapse. Learn why you should buy physical silver and gold. Order Dr. G's P3. Plan, prepare, protect. Visit www.ygliv.com or call 800-705-6840.
Hey, and we're right back, Dr. Robert Benson, talking to Dr. Antonio Graham about geriatrics and the fact that he's a geriatrician. But I found out something very, very interesting about Dr. Graham, is that he once contributed to the great Tom Joyner Morning Show. Is that right, Dr. Graham?
That's right.
Yeah, so
that's right. Did a segment on healthy aging.
Well, man, so I mean, I'm in the presence of true greatness here, okay? Well, Dr. Graham, enough lauding you. Let's get back into in between your ears there and get some more information out of you. One thing I like to do a little research before I interview people, and one of the things I found out or I read about was that there's a couple of different things that really heavily contribute to the state of elderly people, and that is their financial stability or instability, and it allows them to either have access to different care and how it can lead to depression or not, but even deeper still, how it kind of falls and rolls right into their caregiving or the burden of giving their care or providing care to them. Please talk to us about that and some of the recommendations you have and possible scenarios you've seen over the years as far as ways to do the very best, the best we possibly can in addressing those areas.
Sure. Well, as you know, a lot of our seniors really live on Social Security. And for some of them who didn't have jobs that had pensions or continued pensions, we're talking anywhere from $800 to $1,000 a month is kind of on average. Your average senior is living on about that much. Okay. And as you know, that's really not, if you've got, still your utilities and bills, and a lot of the seniors do live, in homes that they've had for many years, so they're paid off, but still they have to pay their taxes. They have other things, maybe after they paid everybody, they have $50 to $100 left. Yeah. And so with that being said, it becomes more difficult then for them to maintain their health because just their living, expenses can pretty much take up all of the income that they have. So in the private world, outside, of course, the VA, sometimes we have to depend on independent agencies. So every state, pretty much in the United States, has a Department of Aging. Here in Georgia, they actually have a county. By the county, each county has its own Department of Aging. Sometimes if you reach out to those sources, either in your state or, other places where you can get some resources that can help with, sometimes they have drug cards or access to get some of the drugs cheaper or, generics or things of that nature, as well as even support for if you need, assistance with cooking and bathing and other things, having people come in and, aids and other things. Sometimes there are services that either will give you those for free or reduced cost, but your departments of aging can help with some of those resources if people need it because they're not done. And the VA, of course, is a whole different thing because we have so many, all those resources are kind of a part of what we offer veterans. So
absolutely,
much easier to do in the VA than it is in the private world.
Yeah, because most of the expenses borne by the pensions that the veterans already have, in addition to the fact that they have that benefit as well. And not everybody is or entitled to that, but the good majority of them are. And then on the other side, as you mentioned before, now let's talk about the burden in that you have caregivers in the home or people who are assigned to, well, not really assigned, but let's just say family members. Elderly person lives with a family member, and they are contributing to the income, if you will, of that household. Have you noticed anything with that, or what are some of the dilemmas that you've experienced or seen with that?
Yeah, so this caregiver burden is a huge, I want to say problem in the sense of that, unfortunately, caregivers are some of the most, under-resourced people who are taking care of our older adults. And typically their spouses and children do the majority of the caregiving in the United States. Okay. And so with that being said, it's not paid. It's, it's a labor of love. But a lot of times caregivers are overextended. don't get any break. They're, working around the clock because, depending on how debilitated the older adult is, sometimes it's a 24/7, job. And a lot of times they don't have any relief. And even, a lot of people who have multiple children, I've seen this every place that I've been around the country. Typically, if they have 8 children, it's still only one child that does all the work.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that one child tends to be, and it's typically a daughter.
Wow. Interesting.
Typically 9 times out of 10, it's a daughter.
Wow.
And that typical person is, they are stressed. They are stretched financially because a lot of times they're also using their finances to help their parent or, if it's an aunt or uncle or whatever, a relative that they're using to sustain them because typically their finances are not, enough. And then also just having sometimes someone to come in, a sitter or another cousin or relative to give them at least maybe one day a week a break from their caregiving activities. So to be honest, it is it's a huge, huge problem that we are still, I think as a country, we need to have better resources for caregivers. And there's some states that are doing better jobs than others of making sure that some of these services can be, attainable, for relatively either affordable costs or even free. So, yeah.
No, that's a great point. And the thing I find very interesting is that, and it never really dawned on me until you mentioned it, is that the majority of the caregivers that you see out there are women. But
yes,
there are some programs out there where people are getting these quasi, certifications to be able to provide care for people. Are you familiar with those at all?
Yeah. So there's a couple like, there's one I think it's called like Senior Angel. There's a couple of different ones that are even nationwide. I think Care Companion is a nationwide company that are basically companies where you hire people. They typically don't necessarily have medical training, but, they can do basic CPR and give medications. But they'll come in and sit with your loved one maybe for, let's say if you need to go to the store or other things so that you can have some break to go, handle other things as a caregiver. So, yes, to your point, these companies do exist, but unfortunately, typically they're $10 to $15 an hour.
Okay.
Is on average what the cost is. So, if the caregiver is already, either not working because they're taking care of their loved one, or, everybody's living on maybe the Social Security, because that's the case sometimes as well. So,
interesting, though, because the one thing I want to ask is, we just had the midterm elections, and I'm just wondering what do you think about, and I haven't noticed anything as far as platform or agenda that politicians are running on. I'm wondering at what point do you think that we need to get a political push to do more for seniors?
Absolutely. I think the time is now that we need to push to have more for seniors. As you know, there are some parties who want to cut Social Security. And as I was telling you, people on average are living on $800 to $1,000. The average senior, that's about how much they're living on in the United States.
Well,
and as we know, that's just not enough.
It's just simply not enough.
It's just simply not enough. And so we really don't have a safety besides Medicare and Social Security. That's it. So Medicare for insurance and Social Security for, whatever income that some people have. And those who are fortunate enough to have a pension, which unfortunately is not the majority, have a pension. So, definitely the time is now to, rally and have some type of system in place to help seniors.
The thing you mentioned about the pension, and I just want to ask a quick question before we take a break here. Based on your knowledge, is that our pensions and Social Security, are people able to get both of those, or they have to have one or the other?
They are able to get both, but I think it does cap how much Social Security you get. So I think if you have a very large pension for, which is not majority of people, sometimes they does put some limits on like how much of both you can have.
Yeah, it almost kind of makes sure you stay in a certain financial bracket. But I think that's a lot.
Exactly.
I think that's a lot of what we have in this country anyway, is that those cap systems make sure people stay in their class, if you will. But Dr. Graham, don't go nowhere. We'll be right back. This is Dr. Robert Benson talking to Dr. Antonio Graham about geriatrics and the aging process of our most precious resources, our the people who've lived their lives and who have made sure that we can live ours, our seniors. And we'll be right back.
Are you struggling with debt collectors? Scared to answer the phone? Order Dr. G's Man Survival Kit and learn how to stop creditors. Visit www.ygliv.com or call 800-705-6840.
Hey, and we're right back. Dr. Robert Benson with Dr. Antonio Graham. He really is kicking some great knowledge to us about our seniors. I mean, the thing that's amazing about it is a lot of stuff that we take for granted and we think we have knowledge of, but until we sit down and get a good conversation with a person who's a professional, who is experienced in these particular fields and areas, we really don't understand thoroughly what we need to do. And that's what we try to do on the Book of Dad radio show, is give you the knowledge you need to take care of yourself and others that are very important to you. But today we're talking about geriatrics and geriatric patients. We all commonly refer to them as senior citizens, but to me it's mom, to you it's dad or aunt or whomever, grandmom or whomever. So it's a personal thing. It's something that we really need to be cognizant of and aware of what the smart and right things to do are. One of the things that I find very interesting about it is that I see a lot of elderly people appear to be isolated. Very, very vulnerable to people who, I don't know, and this could be a perception thing to me. I mean, it's not everywhere, not everybody, but just some of the places I've seen where, frankly, the elderly person is they're isolated. They don't interact with a lot of other people. They're kind of under that roof that they're under. You don't see or hear from them unless you go there or call them or whatever. But that brings me to the point I want to get Dr. Graham to talk about is how, what should we do and how can we make sure that our seniors or our geriatric people are interacting with each other? Do you recommend a nursing home versus in-care home? Or what are some of the things that you've seen, or what do you recommend along those lines?
So in general, I mean, if they have really good support at home, so let's say that there is either a spouse that's still alive and they're able to stay at home safely and that spouse feels supported, then yeah, I'm all for them, staying there and having that support from either family and friends that come to visit their house or other things. But of course, there comes a time where sometimes the needs of one of our seniors is just so great that it's really beyond what someone can do at home.
Right.
And in those, circumstances, then I am in favor of doing, possible nursing home placement. But what I say to family members all the time, because of course, there's a lot of guilt associated sometimes with making that decision, is that one, go and visit. You can go 2 to 3 times a week. Holidays, take them out of the nursing home and bring them home for the holiday for a few days or whatever. The issue is that a lot of people at one point were, literally dropping seniors off and not coming back.
Wow.
But as long as you're still involved in care, and it makes a difference in the type of care they get at the nursing home. The residents who the nurses know, the family comes all the time, they get better care. They
Wow.
just do. Because they know, like, so-and-so's going to come and complain that, hey, mom hasn't been changed, or, grandpa hasn't been changed, or whatever the case may be. So because of that, the care goes up. So, I'm one for as long as you can stay in the home safely, and it's not, tearing the caregiver down as a result of keeping someone at home. I'm in favor of that. But there definitely are situations and circumstances that, going to a nursing home is not necessarily the worst option. It may actually be the best option that someone can get 24/7 around the clock care with involved family members. And I also just want to speak a little bit to what you were saying about the whole isolation thing. That someone actually studied this whole phenomenon of isolation. And what they found is that seniors who were feeling very isolated, let's say their children all live there in Georgia and the children are in California.
Mm-hmm.
And the grandchildren are in California, so they don't really see anyone besides, the ones who either come and take care of them or not. Those people equivalent to smoking 2 cigarettes a day was isolation in terms of taking time off of your mortality. Which, I think that's a pretty powerful study.
Yeah, it is.
To say that that's how important it is for seniors to interact. So one of the things that I recommend to all my seniors is that, even in the VA and when I worked in the private world, is that they be involved in something. Senior center, church, as long as they physically can go to do something, that they should be doing something social.
Right.
Because it does a lot for them to interact with other people, and we know isolation is basically detrimental to their health and their outcome, which is linked to depression and all these other things. So I think the more involved they can be in their community, whatever that community is, the better.
Well, that's amazing that you bring that up because, and I like the analogy of the 2 cigarettes a day, but essentially a senior person can die of a broken heart because they're lonely.
Yeah.
And it just kind of accelerates that process or shortens their lifespan significantly.
Exactly.
The thing I think that's even more amazing about what you stated is that, if they do in fact end up in a nursing facility, that regular visit or people going to see them more often than not is a function of better care, and that's because if someone knows that somebody else cares about them, they're going to care about them too. It's like it's a contagious thing. That's amazing. And even though people are being paid to do a job, if they know that no one's going to check up on them, then they're just going to halfway do it anyway.
Absolutely.
Well, not all the time, but I mean, just some of the time.
But unfortunately, sometimes, in nursing homes, the average person in a nursing home that's working is not even a nurse or even an LPN. Most of the times, they're medical technicians that are working, and they make about $8 to $9 an hour to do, changing people's, feces and urine and other things. So, there's a high turnover in the nursing homes, less qualified necessarily people. So, paid to do a tough job, not paid enough to do a tough job, and understaffed. Right. So, unfortunately, because of that, sometimes that does make barriers to the kind of care that our seniors are getting. But I've seen this time and time again, involved families, those seniors get better care.
It's amazing because, you talked about at the age 30 how things start to, diminish, if you will. And I was going to ask a question. It might even seem facetious to ask this question is how often do you recommend a geriatric patient have a physical? And it doesn't seem like they really need to because they are constantly being seen by providers anyway.
Yeah, I still think, even though, so I'll tell you, I have some seniors. I take care of a gentleman now. He's 92 and he still rides a Harley Davidson. And seriously, he's awesome. But I still even recommend him that I see him at least once a year. Okay. I don't see him more than once a year because he's in pretty good shape. But I tell him if he needs me, he knows where to find me. Come see me if something's not right. But in general, because he's in fairly good health for a 92-year-old gentleman, it really just depends on those needs. So for someone, like him, he's very highly functional. He basically takes a baby aspirin and 1 blood pressure medicine. That's it.
Wow. That's interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay, so let's get some advice from you in the way of how you can prolong your life, or what are some of the things a person can do earlier to make sure that they're that 92-year-old Harley Davidson driver. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Obviously it is.
So, of course, besides, having good genes for some of those who just have parents that have also lived a long time, that's helpful. But the other practical things, rather, that you can do is, one, as I said earlier, exercise is so important. And I see this with my veterans. A lot of them, I guess because of their military backgrounds, even though they were in their 20s and 30s at the time, a lot of them still kind of keep up with that routine of, I got to do my PT, and so even though they're older, they still do 20 to 30 minutes or so, a day, because I think it's just regimented in them that they do that. I think in the regular population, of course, you don't always see that as much of a push to exercise, and exercise is such a broad term, right? Like, it doesn't have to always be, going to a gym and working out. It can be walking around your neighborhood for 30 minutes. Right. It could be, gardening for 30 minutes, because gardening is hard. All the bending over and pulling and working, cleaning your house for a sustained period of time could be considered exercise. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this kind of traditional way. It just needs to be some type of consistent motion for 30 minutes. Not, where you just sit down, but you know what I mean? Like where you're actually doing something. So I also just want to open up the term and the definition of exercise so that people realize there's multiple ways you can do it.
Right.
Of course, as I said earlier, not to promote everybody becoming like a vegan, but There's a lot of studies that show plant-based diet, or at least 80%, 70% plant-based, is protective. I'm sure you guys are you familiar with the Seventh-day Adventist faith.
Good.
They have some of the longest living people in the United States. There's a community in Loma Linda, California, that's pretty much all Seventh-day Adventist people, and they pretty much eat a plant-based diet. They have some of the longest lifespans of people in this whole country living in that region of California.
But Dr. Graham, let's hold that thought. We'll come back and finish talking about the Seventh-day Adventists and the plant-based diet and the other recommendations that you have on the other side of this break. And after that, we'll sum things up and get Dr. Graham to give us some closing thoughts. But this is Dr. Benson with Dr. Graham. Book of Dad Radio Show, and we'll be right back.
Great day, everybody. This is Dr. Gilbert Coleman, and I'm coming to you with some of the most exciting news ever. I am coming to you with the news about a book that many of you men, and even some of you women, have been asking me about for years now. Finally, it is in the making. Transforming the Minds of Men, the book, is soon to be released. And therefore, I want to make sure that all of you will be able to get your copy of it. A book that is going to address male life skills, a book that also is going to address some of the issues that men face on a daily basis, even issues that we face with the women in our lives also. You want to make sure you get it. In fact, some of you ladies, you want to be able to get the book as well, because every transformed man needs a transformed woman. So therefore, you can get ready to pre-order this book. Now, in order to pre-order, just go to my website, GilbertColeman.com. Just that simple. Go to GilbertColeman.com, put in your order, and we'll make sure that we rush your book to you right away. Please know, Transforming the Minds of Men, the book is coming soon. You best make sure you get your copy right away.
Hey, and we're right back. Dr. Robert Benson, Book of Dad Radio Show, Life and Spirit Online, only on the NASCA Network, but Dr. Antonio Graham, who's talking to us about geriatrics. And I mean, again, this is stuff we all need to know about, because it's an inevitability for us to have to deal with geriatrics on some levels. And if we live good enough, as Dr. Graham is about to point out to us, we become not geriatricians, but geriatric patients ourselves. Dr. Graham, when we left off, you were talking about some recommendations. You said one was exercise.
Yes.
Two was diet, and you were sharing a story about a population of people.
Yes, the Seventh-day Adventist, sect of Christianity, they are pretty much all vegetarians as a part of their faith. And there's a large community of Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. And there's a gentleman who studied. He followed them for 30 years. So starting at age 50,
wow,
he followed about 1,000 Seventh-day Adventists, seniors with various conditions, and followed them until their 80s. And about 70% of them made it into their 80s. Versus the regular population was about 50%. So if you extrapolate from that, you could say that, having a plant-based diet basically extended, your life by about 20%, or if you do the numbers, it's roughly 7 to 8 years. Having a plant-based diet extends mortality. And this guy, he did, of course, much more elegant job than I'm saying, but very convincing kind of argument for, why people who have plant-based diet or majority plant-based. So for instance, the Asian diet is majority plant-based, but they still eat about 20 to 30% meat. And as you know, they have the longest life expectancy of any culture in the world. And that's, some people feel like that's why. It's because, and I guess you can say the data backs that up, that, having a more plant-based diet is protective for decreasing your risk of, dying.
I see. So basically,
prematurely.
I'm sorry, but so when we say plant-based diet, we're particularly talking about vegetables.
Yes, fresh fruits and vegetables. That's basically it. So plant-based meaning, meat maybe only 10 to 20%. So let's say some people do one meal a day, they have meat. All the other meals are pretty much, vegetarian or fruits and vegetable based meals. Now, the Seventh-day Adventist population that I'm talking about, they're pretty much, they eat eggs, but in general, they are no meat at all.
I see. Because I was going to, my question to that then is at some point, shouldn't you have some sort of meat? Because we're carnivores as a species, correct? Or is that a good way to put it?
So that's kind of debatable and controversial right now. It is believed that, we we do need protein. We definitely need a source of protein. Does that protein have to be from animals? Not necessarily. I mean, I think that there are, you have to be very diligent, but there are a lot of plant-based protein that you can get as long as you, study and eat right. But you're right. You do need protein. We all need protein is a building block of muscle. So we have to have some protein, but you can get it from other sources besides animal sources.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so you said diet, exercise, diet, and
Yes.
What was the other thing you were going to talk about?
So another thing is, again, people who have very kind of healthy, engaged lives. And what I mean by that is that they are connected in a way that they are still working with other people. They are having lives or careers that they're excited about, that their overall kind of demeanor and outlook on life is good. So when I say an engaged life, meaning one that's kind of a fulfilled life, and whatever that fulfillment means for each person, and that they're connected to people. So people who have great social structure, that tends to be also protective.
Wow. And that gets totally away from the isolation thing we were talking about before.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there was one other thing you wanted to share with us, Dr. Graham, about some signs to look for in elderly people so we'll know that we need to get them the attention of a professional like yourself.
Right. So I was speaking about, some signs of kind of normal aging and memory versus, things that could be possible signs of severe cognitive impairment, or maybe something to concern as it relates to dementia. So one thing would be, it's one thing to go into a room and you forget, maybe once every now and then, right, something. But let's say you have a person who, they always did all of the numbers for the budgeting for the family, and they never bounce a check. They're just on top of it. And all of a sudden, someone that's been doing that for 30 years or 40 years, now they're starting to bounce checks. That's a very bad sign that something likely is wrong, because kind of what we call executive function, which is kind of our ability to think, process, plan, that's one of the first areas that sometimes is affected by dementia. So if something like that happens, that's something significant. Another example would be losing keys. So let's say that, every now and then everybody loses their keys, but let's say that someone who, is fairly functional and reliable is losing their keys like every day, or, 3 or 4 times a week they can't find their keys. That's a sign, like, okay, I should probably be evaluated. They get lost going a route driving. Let's say you go to the particular grocery store in your neighborhood all the time, that's 2 miles away, and then they have to call their children to say, come get me, I can't, or call somebody to take them home because they can't remember. That's a very, you need to be evaluated. That's a pretty big red flag. So those are just some kind of classic signs of cognitive impairment versus kind of normal aging stuff. Every now and then I forget a name. Every now and then I forget faces. If they forget names of like grandchildren or people that they know very well, someone they've known for 50 years, they can't remember their name. That's a bad sign.
I see.
You should be evaluated.
But you were talking earlier about, consumption and, what you consume and that kind of stuff there. I was wondering about alcohol consumption and wine and those types of things. Are there, and I know there's supposedly some studies out there, Dave, I'm sure you're going to correct me if I'm wrong here, that is indicative that, maybe consuming a X amount of wine or something can prolong life over an extended period of time. Is there any truth to that, or what's the data you're familiar with?
Yeah, there are some studies that say that, but again, it's kind of in moderation, and I think that's the problem that most people have with these studies is that, so they're saying basically like 1 6-ounce glass of wine a day. They're not saying like, bottle.
So I can't go get a bottle of Boone's Farm.
Right. Yeah, it seems like 1 6-ounce glass is protected. So it's the amount is where I think people are getting, a little confused. Yeah, it's not a huge amount, but even though it's daily, it's not a lot.
Right. Well, a person with dementia, they can't forget that it can only be 6
ounces. Right. And with dementia, I would just keep them away from alcohol, period. Unless, you just want to give them a treat every now and then. But in general, because, of course, that's going to make them more foggy and confused.
Right. It's interesting you mention that, because you're talking about giving or taking or whatever. At what point do you recommend power of attorneys be generated and done to take the decision-making ability away from a person who's a senior citizen?
Very good question, Dr. Benson. So I think there's kind of two thoughts. So one, honestly, everybody should have advanced planning, even as young as 15. Like everyone should have some type of like, this is what my wishes were if worst case this happened to me. Because as you know, things happen, oddly. Of course, the likelihood of a senior, someone over 65 passing away is much higher than a 20-year-old. But nonetheless, really everybody should have at least those basic things. If someone has, let's say, early diagnosis of dementia, so, they pretty much know where they are, what they're doing, but they just have some memory impairment, that is the time to definitely, while they can make informed decisions and they have capacity to make decisions, to go ahead and appoint, which family member is going to be their POA, who's going to be their medical decision making. Is it one person? Is it two? And then what their wishes are. So, do they want to be, on a ventilator if need be? Do they want, blood transfusion? All of that should be answered where they have the ability, if you have that luxury, to make those decisions. Absolutely.
It's amazing how, we come in dependent and we go out dependent. It's almost like I don't know if I would call it a vicious life cycle, but it's most certainly a realistic one. But Dr. Graham, it's great that you've joined us and provided us with some outstanding information. Would you like to share some closing thoughts with us?
Yes. So in closing, I would like to say that, successful aging, really is about a life of moderation, if you will. So, moderate exercise, a moderate diet, in the sense, of course, you have some things you enjoy, but you try to have majority of the things that you know are good for you. Having good friends and things that are meaningful to you, family, and other things that you're connected to, all kind of put together a recipe for aging successfully. So having seniors that are engaged in their health, engaged in their social lives, all are kind of protective behaviors so that you can age successfully.
Wow. There you have it. Live in moderation, and then your senior years will be, I guess, fruitful or easy. I mean, and not just that, but financial planning turns out to be a very, very important aspect, because I'd like to say everything I've read about this topic has all kind of zeroed back to financing and what you're able to afford. I mean, your living conditions, et cetera. It really does. I mean, especially as you get older, you really start thinking about it quite a bit, Dr. Graham.
No, absolutely. Long-term care insurance, I think is something reasonable. You just have to really read the fine details, because some companies, of course, are trying to take advantage of people, but there are some good ones out there. Where you basically can prepay if you needed any type of, home health aid assistance that can be paid, because unfortunately Medicare does not cover home health. So if you need that, at least you kind of have prepaid it with a long-term care policy. Of course, nursing homes can be also used from long-term care insurance, and assisted living also can be used with some of the long-term care planning. So just have to be careful, because some of them are better than others. But I think that is definitely something to look into, so that at least financially, besides your pension, your Social Security, and other financial resources, you have another way possibly to pay for your care.
Well, Dr. Graham, thank you so much for enlightening us on everything. If we wanted to reach out to you and get more information from you, how could we do that?
Sure. So my Instagram handle is Jerry Aging Expert. And that's a way to reach me. I also have a website, DrAntonioAGraham.com.
All right.
So you can also reach me that way.
Cool. Well, I got your number. I'll call you if I need to talk to you.
All right.
Well, I will make sure your website is out there on the page for the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Graham. It's been a real pleasure, and definitely we've shared some information. You've shared some information, and we are a whole much more enlightened by this topic.
Thank you, Dr. Benson.
You bet. Thanks for hanging out. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right. Hey, this is Dr. Robert Benson with the Book of Dad radio show, Life and Spirit Online, and we have just been enlightened, seriously, by Dr. Antonio Graham on geriatrics. There's a number of things that we all need to be aware of, and some resources that I'm going to make sure I put out on the website to assist with that process. I mean, this is something that everyone is going to have to eventually deal with. So please avail yourself of the process. Listen to this show again and again and again, and then visit the websites that we're going to have out there for you. But as always, Thank you for listening. Keep checking us out on Spotify, Spreaker, and iTunes, and all the various venues that the Book of Dad radio show is on. And thank you so much for listening. But this is the Dr. Robert Benson Book of Dad radio show, Life and Spirit Online on the NASCA Network. And we will talk to you next time.
You can find out more about Robert Benson by visiting his website, thebookofdad.net, where you can purchase your own copies of Robert's books, The Book of Dad, Quotes for a Lifetime of Wisdom, and The Book of Dad 2, more quotes and anecdotes for a lifetime of wisdom.